Welcome to the Million Vegan Grandmothers podcast. And today I have Gerard Bisshop, one of our favorite people at Climate Healers, an amazing scientist in Australia who just wrote a paper that was published in the second leading journal on climate change. And that's what we're going to interview Gerard about today. And Gerard's also going to share with us a little bit about what he's going to be talking about in regards to this paper, which sounds like it's a series of 3 papers, maybe minimum, and how this is going to be shared with the world. So thank you, Gerard, for being here.
Thank you, Tammy. It's a great pleasure. I remember our last podcast. It's lovely to see you again. Yeah, thank you for that. We've just published in the Environmental Research Letters, which is one of the top journals, and already we've got a lot of traction. But you asked a question before about how this fits in with the future papers. Perhaps I could give you the overview of what we're doing with the series of papers and how they'll be working together and how this paper fits in with them. Is that
That
okay?
would be great. First of all, could you tell us the name of this paper and what journal it's in?
Okay. The journal is Environmental Research Letters. Um, it's a it's actually it's one of the old school journals. It's run by a group of scientists. It's not run by a publishing company, and it's always one of the leading journals for reputability. That's why I went for a top journal to get credibility, to get a really strong peer review. So the people who pick it apart are the experts in the industry. So if you do that, the rest of the scientists or the science community has much more confidence in the paper, and so that's why we went for this, and that's actually paying off. I'll talk a bit later about the traction it's getting already in the science community. So
Great.
I'm quite surprised actually, but yeah. Just to paint the picture of how this fits in, I
Mhm.
remember years ago when I first came across Sailesh Rao and Climate Healers. I read some of his work and I scratched my head and I thought, wow, this guy is a genius. But that writing is spot on, but it's not in the form that people could test and look into in great detail, check the sources, all this sort of thing. It 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 was a brilliant white paper, but not the sort of form for science journals. Um, and and I was, Salish himself must have been very frustrated that it didn't get the traction it needed. And all the NGOs, even the favorable NGOs, favorable to the plant-based ideas, were sitting on the sidelines. They were not jumping in saying, yes, we agree with Salish Rao, this is the way to go. You must believe that animal agriculture is the leading source of cause of climate change. They were all sitting back, and I was feeling that frustration because I knew he was right. Um, so then a couple of years ago, I said to Salish, look, we need to get this into journals. So I started writing then, and the writing pathway, I guess, took a few meanders. I didn't follow the track that Salish had laid out exactly. I followed another route, which I'll describe, and but the end result is the same. That it's proving that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. So as it turned out, I wrote a paper, this humongous sort of compendium, a bit like Salish is, long and touching all sorts of things. And we went through several journals. If you go to the very top journals, you go to the Nature and the Science. Nature is probably the world's leading journal, but it's a publishing company, and they're truly, fully commercial, and they pick and choose very carefully. The rejection rate for that journal is over 90%. So it's what scientists do to sort of try and establish their reputation. They aim as high as they can, and expect to be rejected, and then work their way down the list till they get one that accepts it. But all the time getting review feedback so they can sort of refine their writing. Anyway, to cut that story short, my compendium paper was just not getting a response from these leading journals. And the last journal that I went to prior to this one was also a prestigious journal. And they were receptive, and they gave me excellent constructive criticism, which I responded to and put it all back in a paper. And then I got the reply from the journal saying, "I'm sorry, we can't take your paper." And I dug into that to find out why. And it turns out that that they could not find an editor willing to take the paper on. It's just too hot to handle. So all the content is good and to their requirements, but it's too much for them. So what we did is we broke the paper down into segments, and the first idea of breaking it down came from a guy, Abraham Wood, who was a retired climatologist, and he was a co-author for a little while, and he suggested pull it apart because it's too much to swallow, and that's what I did. And now the first part, and I'll describe the parts to the paper. The first part that's been published now is probably the biggest stumbling block that most people have about this line of argument for animal agriculture, and that is this. I'll give you the elevator version. Like when my kids and grandkids say, "What's the paper about?" This is what I tell them. Okay. When we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon dioxide. When we cut down a forest, we release carbon dioxide. We count them very differently. And that's the issue. That's what my paper is about. Let's count them the same way. Radical idea. Anyway, what they did is that, and I first noticed this when I was working on the Beyond Zero Emissions Land Use Plan for Australia. We were looking at agriculture and how to make agriculture and land use net zero. So I looked into the Australian greenhouse gas inventory. Now, these are very, very detailed. Most of the detail is for fossil fuels, and there's a lot of detail in agriculture, but all the land use that is caused by agriculture is sort of over there. It's not agriculture, it's land use. So my work sort of looked at land use and then tried to tease out the parts that are agriculture. Anyway, this is how they cook the books. It's creative accounting. What they do is they say, okay, fossil fuels, we count 100% of the emission, but land use, no, there's deforestation, yeah, but there are other trees growing out here that are soaking up some of that CO2. So let's just take the what's left over, what ends up in the atmosphere. And actually that's logical. It makes sense because what's in the atmosphere affects the climate. The trouble is it's inconsistent with how we treat fossil fuels, because the fossil fuel carbon dioxide also ends up in regrowth, most of it. So it's just that we treat the two main sources of carbon dioxide very differently. So that's not the elevator version, but I rambled on a lot there, I'm sorry. But there you go. This paper is taking both the sources, fossil fuel and deforestation, and it's measuring them by the same metric. It's using gross accounting to account for the emissions from both. And when you do that, it just blows most people's minds. I mean, if you stop anyone on the street, ask them, what's the main cause of climate change? They'll say carbon dioxide and fossil fuels. That's pretty common response. Well, it turns out that fossil fuels are not the main source of carbon dioxide. Since 1750, the main source has been deforestation and other land use, the fires and the peat emissions and so on. So if you change the accounting, if you fix up the creative accounting that was reasoned 3 decades ago when they put this, see, greenhouse gas accounting is a new idea. We've only been doing it since the IPCC was formed in the late 80s. So they were on the run. They had to get this thing up and running. And so they looked at land use as a sort of a side issue. And how do we count that? Okay, let's take the net. It was really hard to measure. There were a lot of unknowns, a lot of high uncertainties. And so at the time they made that decision. Well, we know what the emissions are now. We have these amazing digital global vegetation models that use satellite imagery and ground data and lots of data and putting it all together. So we can measure the emissions from deforestation really well now. Not as accurately as fossil fuels because, a litre of petrol produces so much CO2 and deforestation, it's a little more uncertain. But the thing is that now we're in a position where we can count it much more accurately. And what my paper is saying is now is the time we need to count it consistently. We shed that dodgy accounting and we account for it all the same way. So the bottom line from that is that when you do that, it turns out that the land use emissions, the deforestation, has been responsible for more carbon dioxide than fossil fuels. So you can imagine the reaction of the climate change community. There's thousands of people out there who've been pinning their careers to battling fossil fuels. And when we come along and say, well, hang on, no, deforestation's caused more CO2 than fossil fuels, then they sort of, what's going on? Their worldview changes. So so it's been to get that traction, to get that acceptance has been a journey. It's taken over a year to get this first paper published. But the interesting thing now is that process, that process of going through the journals, getting the feedback and sending it back to them and saying, publish this, and them getting frightened by it and dodging. That process has made this paper that's just been published a really tight, excellent. I wrote it, so I can say that it's a good piece of science. So the reaction to it. Do you want to talk about the reaction to it so far?
Yeah, I would like to talk about the reaction to it. And I would also like to talk about how this really leads into the next one, because why are we cutting down trees? And then that's where you lead into, right?
Yes,
How come
yes,
trees are so important? We know
yes,
that it's not just for the environmental impact, but also what else happens and why are
yes,
we cutting down all these trees? Yes.
yes. Okay. So, sorry, that was where I started. I ramble off, I'm afraid. But yeah, the full picture. This first part about deforestation is just the start. Okay. So if you count deforestation properly, it's the major source of CO2. So now we've got a situation where those industries that have caused deforestation in the past or at the present, those industries are now they come from down the bottom of the ranking of the sector ranking. They're shoved up the top now. And we all know what's caused the deforestation. It's agriculture. And most of that is animal agriculture. So, so this immediately changes the whole perspective on, this nasty CO2 gas that's in the atmosphere and where did it come from and who's responsible. And now we can point the finger at the ones who cause the deforestation. We can't ignore fossil fuels, of course. Fossil fuels are still a major source, but that leads me into the next paper, which I'll describe, which is also really interesting because in this journey that I took based on Salesh's work and trying to make it into the sort of language and the sort of science that is accepted, I stumbled across another way to measure greenhouse gases. And the IPCC and other scientists developed this a few years back, and they've been refining it. Now, what happens when we emit greenhouse gases, particularly methane? Methane's a really curious gas because it has several downstream gases. So, you know, in the atmosphere, it's all jumbled up and it's all atmospheric science is still a new science and they're still learning about these things. This is why you may remember, but when we first started measuring methane against carbon dioxide, it was measured at 21 times more powerful. Okay, well, as we understand methane and its downstream gases, that 21 has now become 28. And then we look at 20 years, it's now become 84 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So what's happening is that climate science is getting better, atmospheric chemistry is getting better, and this new measure that they're coming out with called effective radiative forcing. So with this new metric, we can say how much of the global warming has been caused by carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and all the other gases. So that's what the paper does. It takes all of that and says, okay, out of the carbon dioxide, how much is caused by animal ag, how much is caused by fossil fuels, etc. Methane, what's caused by this, what's caused by that. And then we add it all up. But the interesting thing there is that, and this is a jaw dropper that Salish also identified, and that is that when we burn fossil fuels, we not only release carbon dioxide that warms the planet, we also release sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides that cool the planet. This is the North America has it, Europe had it originally, and they've cleaned up their act dramatically. Remember, it was 2 or 3 decades ago, the problems in Europe they had with acid rain. Well, that was because of these aerosols that are emitted by coal-fired and gas-fired power stations. So this sulfur dioxide was in the atmosphere forming sulfuric acid and then raining down. Okay, so they saw this and they cleaned up their act and Europe's skies cleared. Okay. North America did the same thing. China is now covered in a blanket of sulfur dioxide. So it's you go to Beijing and the skies are rarely blue. They're normally grey. And the greyness is what reflects the sun to cool the planet. So the amount of sulfur dioxide, the amount of aerosols that we've been emitting with fossil fuels has had a huge cooling impact right around the globe. And this cooling impact has been almost equal to the warming from carbon dioxide or from fossil fuels. So we've got a situation where we've now discovered, okay, anything that takes out trees, that's a major cause of global warming. And now when you factor in the cooling emissions, that takes what used to be up here for fossil fuels, it now takes it down here. So what ends up on top? Agriculture, particularly animal agriculture. So that's the next paper or papers that will be submitted very soon. So that's the series. this has been a journey to sort of rewrite, if you like, Salesh's work in language that is accepted, and um, it's a language all of its own. The science languages and the conversations they have. It's a club, of course, and you've got to earn your way into that club. Um, you know, this is why I'm surprised at the traction it's got already. Um, but yeah,
Can you
that's
share some of
that's
that
the
traction,
overview.
Gerard? Can you share some of that traction you've been getting as you're moving your way into the science community and giving authentic science? Because, science, a lot of scientists are getting pretty fed up with the science that is being put out there.
Yes,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So the traction you're getting is on authentic science.
Yes, exactly. And this is interesting. I've come across Kat Lawrence. She's with the plant-based treaty, and she came and we sat down and had a chat a few months back. And she's just one of these amazing people who's a mine of information about how to get your message out. And so she jotted down an email that turns out to be my communication strategy. She's just amazing. But on that is and I was going to do this, but now I've sort of created this video that you'll be seeing, and created press releases and magazine articles, etc., suitable for publication. Anyway, that's still coming. I've just started this a week ago, but I sent out the emails to scientists, that is, people in this field, in this science, um, 3 days ago, and already the response has been beyond my wildest dreams. Basically, I've had the top four people in the land emissions, climate science, come back to me and say, "This is a good idea. We like it. We were thinking of doing it anyway." So, they're going to discuss it as a group for the big international um, inventory, if you like. That they've got this thing called the global carbon budget, and the global carbon budget is a group of scientists. Hundreds of scientists have contributed. It's not United Nations, it's not IPCC, it's just a bunch of scientists who put this thing together themselves. And each year they come out with a global carbon budget, and they say what's the emissions, what's the drawdown, what's going on, and I'm on my screen now. I've got a picture of their last um, their last report, which came out a couple of months ago, and they have diagrams now that show the gross emissions as well as the net emissions, like the gross emissions and drawdown. This is what my accounting is all about. So their response has been, yes, we agree with what you're doing, and we will discuss it as a group for future carbon budgets. So perhaps my paper has just been another. Other people have been proposing these ideas before. It's just that I put it in the global carbon budget language that they understand. So now that I've done that, they might use mine as a catalyst. What I think is that the climate is right now. I think so many things are changing in our world, and one of the things is that um, the club of science that I mentioned before is cracking. It's becoming more fluid. You also you get some crazies out there, but you also get the old guard being sort of the new guard coming in with new ideas. This is one of those ideas, and um, what it says to me is that this is an idea whose time has come, and So now it would surprise me. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if the global carbon budget within a year or two adopted gross accounting. And if they did that, it would be obvious to everyone in the climate change community, hey guys, fossil fuels are not the main game. The main game is all those forests we cut down, those 3 trillion trees that we've cut down in the past. And so what that will do is it will change people's perspective. It will change their attitudes towards trees, towards forests. It boosts the carbon emissions from deforestation by 2.8, a factor of 2.8, which is huge. Um, so that all the programs that are protecting forests and stopping forests from being cut down, they automatically get 2.8 times more funding for that carbon amount. So it's going to revolutionise that aspect. It's also going to revolutionise the sectors that we discussed about before. Agriculture goes to the top. Fossil fuels goes down to about a quarter of climate change. And forestry is boosted as well. So, yeah, it's been quite a process, and it's still ongoing. But that response, that science response to that first paper, has been beyond my wildest dreams, to tell you the truth. So I'm really excited about the traction it's getting, and hopeful for the next bet. The next bet is going to be a lot harder to swallow. But mine's not the first paper on this, using this new metric called uh, uh, emissions. Yeah, it's a new metric that looks at emissions of each gas and how much warming that's caused. So this metric, others have used it, and they've also found the same thing that I have, that fossil fuels have caused, well, the last paper came out 4 years ago, and it said that fossil fuels have caused 20% of global warming. It's amazing. My estimates at the moment is about 25%. So yeah, this is pretty big, but I'm not the first. So I'm hoping that it will also get through. So yeah, that's the story in a nutshell. And so the message is getting out in the language that they like. I mean, Salish has been talking about this for a long time, but it he has got nothing of the traction that he should have got. So hopefully this will help that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Gerard. And will this be what you'll be speaking at our convergence? VCOP stands for
Yes.
Vegan Convergence of the People, that we're having November 9th and 10th. It's going to be virtual and in person in Arizona. And you'll be speaking virtually on this paper. And can you tell our listeners the name of your paper again?
Oh, yes. The paper is called Deforestation, a call for consistent accounting. And
That's perfect.
yeah, so deforestation, a call for consistent accounting. And the short video that you'll be playing, I think does a pretty good job of describing it. So I know I tend to ramble a lot and go into topics that people scratch their head on, but I'm really happy with the way this is going. And I think what has happened is the tide has turned. I think that the at the moment, I think there's a lot of truths coming out. A lot of what has been hidden from us in the past is now being corrected, and this is one of those. Um, and I think it's not that, I'm a brilliant writer. It's just that the time is right for this message, and it's in the language that they accept. So I think, yeah, I'm pretty happy about this, and the future, for getting it right on climate.
Yeah. Getting it right on on everything when it comes to our planet. And climate is one piece of that. We are just about to cross the seventh, I think, of 9 planetary boundaries. I think we're way up there. We just crossed 6 or 7. So it's getting it right on how to be stewards. And the grandmothers are here for the grandchildren of all species. And we think of what you're writing about and the climate and the accounting, getting the accounting right on deforestation, but it's also getting the compassion right on deforestation and how many homes have been destroyed in the process of the way that we do business as usual. And so
Mm,
one day we will be accountable, and the time is now. The time is now.
yeah.
And when you talk about the tides turning, it's because we have no choice. It's like Silesh often said, we're going to come willingly or we're going to come kicking and screaming. And there's no denying things. And there's lots
Yeah.
of prophecies that speak of 2025 being the turnaround of
Okay.
consciousness as we know it. There's a large Hopi prophecy that has spoken of
Ah,
that. And the Essene prophecy as well said that 2025 would be the mark of the beginning of us cleaning things up and coming to a world of peace over the next 75 years. So
well,
holding out for a world of peace that our grandchildren will get to experience peace on earth. Can you imagine peace on earth?
ah, how good.
How good
That's
that would be.
that feels right too, and Salish nailed it way back when he said 2026 we'll have
Hmm.
a vegan world. I
Hmm.
I I thought, well, maybe, but maybe he's right.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Gerard, for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Great pleasure.